Most people who start this audiobook think they know what gratitude means, but they never realize they never did. I need you to hear something that most people will go their entire lives without realizing. You already have enough. You just don't know how to feel it yet. Feeling enough and then some. 12 secrets to feeling deeply grateful and fully alive. Introduction. In this audiobook, I'm going to give you 12 secrets, not theories, not motivational fluff, but real life-changing shifts that will completely transform the way you see yourself, your relationships, and every single day you're alive. By the time you finish this book, gratitude won't be something you practice. It will be something you breathe. Most people will spend their entire lives chasing a feeling they already had access to and never knew it. More money, more success, more validation, and still that quiet emptiness follows them everywhere they go. What if the life you've been searching for isn't ahead of you, but all around you, right now, waiting to be seen? Maybe you're listening to this on your commute or lying in bed at night wondering why the life you built still doesn't feel like enough. Maybe you've achieved things you once dreamed of and felt nothing. Or maybe life has been hard lately and you're struggling to find anything to be grateful for at all. Wherever you are, this book was written for you. Chapter 1. See what's already there. There is a woman who wakes up every morning, makes her coffee, stands at her kitchen window, and stares outside for exactly 3 minutes before her day begins. She's been doing it for 20 years, and for 19 of those years, she never once saw the tree in her backyard. Not really. It was just there. Background noise. Part of the scenery she had stopped looking at a long time ago. One morning, after a storm, she noticed the tree had lost one of its largest branches, and for the first time, she felt something. A quiet sadness, because in that moment she realized that branch had been beautiful. That tree had been beautiful, and she had been walking past it every single day without ever truly seeing it. That tree is your life. Secret number 1 is this: you cannot be grateful for what you refuse to see. And most of us, without realizing it, have stopped seeing. Not because we're selfish or shallow, but because the human brain is wired for survival, not appreciation. It scans for threats, for problems, for what's missing. It was never designed to pause and whisper, "Look how beautiful this is." So we move through our days on autopilot. We eat without tasting. We hug without feeling. We arrive home without remembering the drive. We are physically present in our lives and emotionally somewhere else entirely. Usually in the past, replaying what went wrong, or in the future, anxious about what might. There's a concept in neuroscience called habituation. It means that the more familiar something becomes, the less your brain registers it. Your brain essentially says, "I've seen this before, nothing to report," and tunes it out. It's why you stop hearing the hum of your refrigerator. It's why the drive to work becomes invisible. And it's why, tragically, the people and blessings closest to you become the easiest to overlook. Habituation isn't a flaw, it's efficiency, but it comes at a cost. And that cost is wonder. That cost is presence. That cost is gratitude. So here is your first challenge, and I want you to take it seriously. Think about something in your life that has become background noise. Maybe it's your home, the roof over your head you haven't appreciated since the day you got it. Maybe it's your health, the body that carried you through yesterday without you once saying thank you. Maybe it's a person, Someone who shows up for you so consistently that you've stopped noticing the showing up. Now I want you to see it, really see it, not with your eyes, with your awareness. Ask yourself, what would my life feel like without this? How would tomorrow morning look if this was suddenly gone? That feeling that just moved through you, that quiet ache, that flicker of panic, that warmth, that is gratitude waking up. That is presence, and that is where everything in this book begins. Seeing what's already there doesn't require a meditation retreat or an hour of journaling. It requires a decision, a daily, deliberate decision to look at your life like a visitor, not a resident. Visitors notice things. They marvel at ordinary details. They take photos of sunsets that locals have stopped looking at. What if you became a visitor in your own life? What if just once today you looked at your dinner table, your front door, your child's laugh, your own hands, and saw them for the first time? This is the foundation of everything that follows in this book, because you cannot multiply what you cannot see. You cannot appreciate what you've made invisible, and you cannot feel enough until you learn to look. Before we move to secret number 2, I want to leave you with this. Tonight, before you sleep, find one thing, just one, that has been living in the background of your life. Something ordinary, something you pass every day, and look at it like it might not be there tomorrow, because one day it won't be. See what's already there. That's secret number 1, and it changes everything. In Chapter 2, we're going to talk about one of the most toxic habits quietly stealing your gratitude every single day. And most people don't even know they're doing it. Secret number 2, let go of the comparison trap. That's next. Chapter 2, let go of the comparison trap. There was a man who had everything he once prayed for, a steady job, a loving family, a home he had worked years to own. On paper, his life was an answered prayer, and for a while it felt like one too. Then one evening he downloaded an app, just to stay connected, he told himself, just to see what people were up to. And slowly, quietly, almost invisibly, something shifted. He started seeing the vacations he wasn't taking, the promotions he hadn't received, the bodies he didn't have, the relationships that looked more exciting than his own, the homes that were bigger, the smiles that seemed brighter. Within 6 months, without a single thing in his life actually changing, he felt like a failure. The same job now felt like a dead end. The same home felt small. The same life that once felt like a blessing now felt like a consolation prize. Nothing had changed, except what he was looking at. Secret number 2 is this: comparison is not motivation, it is theft. It walks into the house of your contentment and it steals everything that isn't nailed down. Your joy, your progress, your sense of self, your gratitude. And it does it so quietly, so gradually, that most people never even realize they've been robbed. We live in the most comparative era in human history. Never before have ordinary people had a front row seat to the highlight reels of thousands of other lives. Every single day, every single hour in the palm of their hand. And we were not built for this. Our minds were designed to compare ourselves to perhaps a few dozen people in our immediate community, not thousands, not millions, and certainly not the carefully curated, filtered, and staged versions of lives that social media presents as reality. Psychologists call it social comparison theory, first introduced by Leon Festinger in 1954. His research found that human beings have a fundamental drive to evaluate themselves, and that we almost always do it by looking at others. When we compare ourselves to people we perceive as doing better, what researchers call upward comparison. It consistently produces feelings of inadequacy, envy, and dissatisfaction. But here is what makes it truly dangerous. The brain doesn't distinguish between a real comparison and a false one. It doesn't know that the person on your screen spent 3 hours setting up that photo. It doesn't know that the couple who looks deeply in love had a screaming argument that same morning. It doesn't know that the body you're envying came at the cost of an obsession you wouldn't want. It simply sees they have more, and it begins to whisper, "You are less." So here is your second challenge, and this one might sting a little, because the truth sometimes does. I want you to think about who you compare yourself to most. Maybe it's a colleague, a sibling, an old friend whose life seems to have unfolded more easily than yours. Maybe it's a stranger on the internet whose success feels like a quiet accusation every time you see it. Now I want you to ask yourself, what do I actually know about their full story? Not their highlight reel. Their full story. The sleepless nights, the private doubts, the sacrifices nobody posted about, the chapters they never showed the world. Because here is the truth that comparison never tells you. Everyone is carrying something heavy. Everyone. The person whose life looks the most effortless from the outside is often fighting the hardest battle behind closed doors. You are not comparing your life to their life. You are comparing your insides to their outsides. And that is a game you will never, ever win. But there is something even more important I want you to understand. And this is the real secret beneath the secret. Comparison steals your gratitude not just because it makes you feel less than, but because it redirects your gaze. The moment your eyes move to someone else's life, they move away from your own, and you cannot see what you're not looking at. Every minute you spend measuring your life against someone else's is a minute you are not living yours. Every moment of envy is a moment of blindness. Blindness to the very things that secret number one asked you to start seeing again. Comparison and gratitude cannot exist in the same moment. They are not just opposites. They are enemies. And you have to decide, every single day, which one you are going to let win. So how do you break free from the comparison trap, especially in a world designed to keep you inside it? First, become aware of your triggers. Notice the specific moments when comparison pulls you in. Is it a particular app, a certain person's page, a family gathering where achievements get measured against each other? Awareness is always the first act of freedom. Second, replace comparison with curiosity. Instead of asking, why do they have what I don't? Ask, what can I learn from them? Shift from envy to inspiration. The same information that destroys you as a comparison becomes fuel when received as a lesson. And third, come back to your own lane, literally. Physically redirect your attention back to your own life, your own progress, your own story. Ask yourself, compared to who I was a year ago, how have I grown? That is the only comparison that will ever serve you. You versus the previous version of you. That race is the only one worth running. Before we move forward, sit with this for a moment. The life you have right now, imperfect, unfinished, still in progress, is someone else's answered prayer. Somewhere, someone is hoping for the job you take for granted. Someone is longing for the relationship you've stopped appreciating. Someone is fighting to stay alive so they can have one more ordinary Tuesday, exactly like the one you almost sleepwalked through today. Your life is not a consolation prize. It never was. Let go of the comparison trap. That is secret number 2. And when you do, you get your life back. In Chapter 3, we go somewhere most people avoid. We're going to walk straight into the hardest moments of your life, the painful ones, the ones that broke you, And we're going to find something unexpected waiting inside them. Secret number 3, find the gift in the difficult. That's next. Chapter 3, find the gift in the difficult. There is a Japanese art form called kintsugi. It is the practice of repairing broken pottery with gold, not hiding the cracks, not throwing the broken piece away, but tracing every fracture with liquid gold, making the place where it broke the most beautiful part of the whole piece. The philosophy behind it is simple and profound. The break is not the end of the story. The break is where the gold gets in. I want you to hold that image as we walk through this chapter together, because what I am about to ask you to do is one of the hardest things in this entire book. I am going to ask you to look at your pain, your real pain, the kind that kept you up at night, the kind that changed you, the kind you would never have chosen. And I am going to ask you to look for the gold. Secret number 3 is this: your hardest moments are not interruptions to your life. They are instructions for it. Every difficulty you have ever survived has been shaping something in you that comfort never could. Patience, resilience, empathy, depth, wisdom, character. These are not things you can buy, learn from a book, or acquire in easy times. They are forged, and the forge is always hot. This is not about pretending pain isn't real. It is not about toxic positivity or slapping a smile on suffering. The grief was real. The loss was real. The betrayal, the failure, the heartbreak, all of it was real, and it hurt, and it was allowed to hurt. But here is what is also true, and what gratitude eventually asks us to reckon with. You are still here, and everything that tried to break you didn't, which means somewhere in that storm, you found something strong enough to hold on to, and that strength is yours forever now. Researchers Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun spent decades studying people who had experienced profound trauma, illness, loss, disaster, violence, and what they discovered changed the field of psychology. They found that a significant number of people who walked through devastating experiences didn't just recover. They grew. They emerged from their suffering with a deeper appreciation for life, stronger relationships, a clearer sense of purpose, and a spiritual or personal depth they hadn't possessed before. They called this phenomenon post-traumatic growth, and it reframed the entire conversation around suffering. Not post-traumatic stress alone, but post-traumatic growth. The idea that the very thing that wounds us, under the right conditions and with the right perspective, can become the very thing that expands us. This doesn't mean suffering is good. It means that within suffering, growth is possible. And finding that growth is one of the most powerful acts of gratitude a human being can perform. Here is your third challenge, and I want you to approach it gently, with the same care you would offer a close friend. Think of one difficult season in your life, one that genuinely hurt, one you would not have chosen. It might be a relationship that ended, a dream that didn't survive, a health scare, a loss that rearranged everything, a failure so humiliating you still flinch when you think about it. Now I want you to ask yourself 3 questions and answer them honestly. First, who did that experience force me to become? Not who I wished I had been in that moment, but who I actually became because of it. More patient, more careful, more compassionate toward others in pain, more clear about what truly matters. Second, what did I discover I was capable of that I never would have known without that trial? What strength surfaced that had been sleeping inside you, waiting for a reason to wake up? And third, what do I now understand about life, about people, about myself, that I could not have learned any other way? Take your time with those questions, because somewhere in the answers, the gold is waiting. I want to tell you something that took me a long time to understand, and I offer it not as a platitude, but as a hard-won truth. The things in your life that you are most grateful for, if you trace them back far enough, almost always have a difficult moment at their root. The career that finally clicked came after the job that crushed you. The relationship that healed you came after the one that broke your heart wide open. The version of yourself you are most proud of today was assembled piece by piece from the ruins of who you used to be. Difficulty is not the opposite of a good life. It is often the architect of one. The question is never, why did this hard thing happen to me? The question, the one that changes everything, is what is this hard thing trying to build in me? I want to share a story. A woman named Miriam lost her job of 14 years on a Thursday afternoon in November. No warning, no severance, just a meeting, a box, and a parking lot. She described the months that followed as the darkest of her adult life, the shame of it, the silence at dinner, the applications that went unanswered, the slow erosion of her confidence until she barely recognized herself in the mirror. And then, 18 months later, she was sitting at the head of a table in a company she had built herself, a company that wouldn't exist if she hadn't been handed that box in that parking lot on that Thursday in November. When asked if she was grateful for losing her job, she paused for a long time. And then she said, "I am not grateful for the pain of it, but I am profoundly grateful for what the pain produced. I would not be who I am without it, and who I am now, I would not trade for anything." That is kintsugi. That is the gold in the crack. Finding the gift in the difficult is not a one-time exercise. It is an ongoing practice, one that gets easier and more natural the more you do it. Here are 3 ways to begin. The first is reframing, not denying. When something hard happens, resist the immediate urge to label it as purely bad. Hold space for the possibility that you don't yet know the full story of this moment. Some chapters only make sense when you've read further ahead. The second is gratitude journaling for hard seasons. Not just writing what you're thankful for, but specifically writing what a painful experience taught you, gave you, or built in you. This is one of the most transformative writing exercises a human being can do. It literally rewires the way the brain files difficult memories, from threat to resource. And the third is telling your story differently. The narrative you carry about your hardest moments shapes everything. If the story is "that terrible thing happened to me," you remain a victim of it forever. But if the story becomes "that terrible thing happened for me," and here is what it made possible, you become the author of it. And authors have power that victims never do. Before we move on, I want you to sit with something. You have survived 100% of your worst days. Every single one. The ones that felt unsurvivable, you survived. The ones that felt like they would define you forever, you outlasted. You are still here, still listening, still reaching for something better. That is not weakness. That is one of the most extraordinary things a human being can do. Your cracks are not your shame. They are your story. And when you fill them with the gold of awareness, growth, and gratitude, you don't just heal. You become a masterpiece. Find the gift in the difficult. That is secret number 3. In chapter 4, we slow everything down. We step away from the big dramatic moments of life and turn our attention to something much quieter and far more powerful than most people realize. Secret number 4, honor the small moments. That's next. Chapter 4, honor the small moments. There is a grandfather who lives alone now. His house is quieter than it used to be. The children grew up. The years moved fast, the way years always do. And now, most evenings, it is just him and the hum of the refrigerator and the last light of the day coming through the kitchen window. When his granddaughter visited him one afternoon and asked him what he missed most about the years when the house was full, he didn't say the birthdays, he didn't say the holidays or the vacations or the big celebrations that filled photo albums. He said, "I miss Tuesday mornings, when everyone was still in pajamas and nobody was in a hurry yet, when the coffee was hot and the kids were loud and your grandmother was humming something in the kitchen and nobody knew they were happy because they were too busy just being it." Tuesday mornings, not the grand occasions, the ordinary ones. That is what we lose when we stop honoring the small moments. Not just the moments themselves, but the happiness that was living inside them all along, quiet and unhurried, waiting to be noticed. Secret number 4 is this: a beautiful life is not made of extraordinary events. It is made of ordinary moments, extraordinarily felt. The milestone birthdays and the dream vacations and the promotions, those are the punctuation marks of a life. But the small moments, the Tuesday mornings, the shared meals, the familiar laugh, the warm cup held in both hands on a cold day, those are the sentences, those are the paragraphs, those are the actual substance of everything. And yet we treat them as filler, as the waiting room between the moments that actually count. We rush through them, scroll through them, endure them, always leaning forward toward the next big thing, the next achievement, the next event worth remembering. But here is the unbearable irony. The moments we are rushing through are the ones we will one day ache to have back. The ordinary Tuesday, the unremarkable dinner, the quiet drive with someone we loved. These are not the spaces between the memories. These are the memories. We just didn't know it yet. Psychologist Sonia Lyubomirsky, one of the world's leading researchers on happiness, found something remarkable in her studies. She discovered that people who regularly savored small, everyday pleasures reported significantly higher levels of life satisfaction and gratitude than those who only celebrated major events. Savoring, the conscious, deliberate act of fully experiencing and appreciating a positive moment as it happens, activates the same neural reward pathways as the major milestones we spend so much energy chasing. In other words, your brain doesn't actually need a promotion or a vacation to feel genuinely good. It needs presence. It needs attention. It needs someone to say, "This moment right here is worth slowing down for." The capacity for joy is not reserved for special occasions. It is available in the ordinary, if you are paying attention. Here is your 4th challenge, and this one I want you to carry with you, not just through this chapter, but through the rest of today. I want you to think about the small moments in your daily life that you have been moving through without truly arriving in. The morning routine you perform on autopilot, the meal you eat while looking at a screen, the conversation you half listen to while your mind is somewhere else, the sunset you glanced at but didn't stop for, the child's story you nodded through but didn't really hear. Now choose one, just one small, ordinary moment that happens in your life regularly. And the next time it arrives, I want you to treat it like it might be the last time, because one day it will be. Not with dread, not with anxiety, but with the quiet, wide-eyed attention of someone who understands that ordinary moments are actually miracles in disguise. Poorly lit, unhurried, unremarkable miracles, but miracles nonetheless. There is a reason why the people who have faced death, whether through illness, accident, or loss, so often come back to the same realization. They never say they wished they had attended more conferences or closed more deals or accumulated more things. They talk about the smell of rain, the weight of a child sleeping on their chest, the sound of laughter in the next room, the feeling of a hand held in the dark. These are not small things wearing the costume of big things. These are the big things. They were always the big things. We just had to get close enough to the edge to finally see it. The invitation of this secret is to not wait for that edge, to not require a diagnosis or a loss or a near miss to shake you awake, to choose right now in the middle of the ordinary to see what has been extraordinary about your life all along. A woman named Elena was diagnosed with a serious illness in her early 40s. During her treatment, she began keeping what she called a small moments journal, not a gratitude journal in the traditional sense, but a daily record of the tiniest details she had decided to start noticing. The way her daughter's hand felt in hers walking into school, the specific sound her front door made when her husband came home, the first sip of tea before anyone else in the house was awake, the particular quality of light on a Sunday afternoon that felt like the whole world had slowed down. She filled 3 journals during her treatment, and when she recovered, and she did recover, she said the journals had done something she hadn't expected. They hadn't just helped her get through the hard days, they had permanently changed the way she experienced the good ones. She said, "I used to live on the surface of my life. Now I live inside it, and I would not trade that for anything. Not even the health I almost lost to find it." She still keeps the journal, not because she has to, but because she finally understands what she was missing all those years before. She understands that the small moments were never small at all. Honoring the small moments is a practice. And like all practices, it begins with a single deliberate step. Here are 3 ways to start today. The first is to slow your mornings. The first 20 minutes of your day set the emotional tone for everything that follows. Instead of reaching for your phone before your feet hit the floor, give those first moments to yourself. Feel the quiet. Notice the light. Be somewhere before you go everywhere. The second is to create what I call anchor moments. These are small rituals that you consciously designate as sacred. The morning coffee, the evening walk, the bedtime conversation, the Sunday meal. They don't have to be elaborate, they just have to be intentional. Treat them as appointments with your own life, ones you keep without apology. And the third is to practice the pause. Before you move from one moment to the next, pause for just 3 breaths. 3 conscious breaths between the meeting and the next task, between dinner and the dishes, between the story and the good night. 3 breaths to say, I was here, this happened, this mattered. 3 breaths is all it takes to turn a moment from something you survived into something you actually lived. I want to leave you with a question tonight. Not a challenge this time, just a quiet question to sit with before you sleep. What was the smallest moment of today that deserved more of your attention than you gave it? Maybe it was a smile from a stranger, a song that came on at exactly the right time, a meal someone prepared for you with hands that love you, a moment of silence between the noise that felt, just for a second, like peace. It was there, it is always there. The small moments never stop showing up for us. They just wait, patiently and without demand, for us to finally show up for them. Honor the small moments. That is secret number 4. And in the honoring, you will find that your life is far richer than you ever allowed yourself to believe. In Chapter 5, we turn outward for the first time in this book. We've been looking at ourselves, our minds, our wounds, our moments. Now we look at what we give, because one of the most surprising secrets to feeling grateful and fulfilled has nothing to do with receiving, and everything to do with what happens when we give without keeping score. Secret number 5, give without keeping score. That's next. Chapter 5. Give without keeping score. There was a man named Robert who kept a mental ledger. He had been keeping it his entire adult life without ever realizing it. Every favor he did was quietly logged. Every gift he gave was internally noted. Every time he showed up for someone, drove them to the airport, helped them move, listened to their problems at midnight, A small, invisible entry was made in the book he carried everywhere but never spoke about. And every time those same people didn't show up for him, didn't call on his birthday, forgot the favor, moved on without a word of thanks, the ledger would open, and the balance would shift, and the resentment would begin its slow, quiet build. He wasn't a bad man, he was a generous man on the surface. But underneath the generosity was a transaction, and underneath the transaction was an expectation, and underneath the expectation was a wound that never healed because it never stopped being poked. Robert was generous with his hands, but he was keeping score with his heart, and that is the difference between giving and truly giving. Secret number 5 is this: generosity that carries an expectation is not generosity at all. It is a loan, and loans accrue interest. They create invisible debt between people, quiet tension in relationships, and a slow corrosion of the very connections we are trying to build. True giving, the kind that actually fills you rather than depletes you, is giving with open hands, giving without a return address, giving because the act itself is the reward, because something in you recognizes that when you pour into another person's life, without condition and without calculation, something extraordinary happens. You don't feel emptier, you feel more full, and that fullness, that quiet, bone-deep satisfaction of having given something real, is one of the closest things to pure gratitude that a human being can experience. The research on generosity is both surprising and consistent. Studies from the University of British Columbia found that people who spent money on others reported significantly higher levels of happiness than those who spent the same amount on themselves, regardless of income level. The act of giving, not receiving, was the happiness driver. Neuroscientists have identified what they call the helper's high, a measurable release of dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin that occurs in the brain when we give to others. These are the same chemicals associated with deep pleasure, emotional connection, and well-being. Your brain is literally designed to reward you for generosity. But here is the detail that changes everything. The neurological reward is highest when the giving is unconditional. When there is no expectation of return, no mental ledger, no waiting for the acknowledgement, the brain's response is strongest, as if the purest form of giving unlocks the purest form of fulfillment. You were wired for this. The question is whether you are giving in a way that lets you feel it. Here is your 5th challenge, and this one requires a rare level of honesty with yourself. Think about the ways you give in your life. Your time, your energy, your resources, your attention. And now ask yourself, honestly, without judgment, am I giving freely, or am I keeping score? Is there someone in your life toward whom you carry a quiet resentment, not because they hurt you directly, but because the ledger is unbalanced, because you gave and they didn't give back in the way you needed, because you showed up and they didn't show up in return? Now ask yourself this. When you gave to that person, what were you really giving? A gift or an invoice with the payment terms left unspoken? This is not about excusing people who genuinely take advantage of your kindness. Boundaries are real and necessary, and we will talk about them later in this book. This is about examining the quiet expectations we attach to our generosity without even realizing it, and understanding how those expectations are silently poisoning the very relationships and the very joy we are trying to cultivate. There is something almost paradoxical about true generosity. The less you give in order to receive, the more you receive. Not always from the person you gave to, not always in the form you expected, but life has a remarkable way of returning what is genuinely offered. But more than that, and this is what I really want you to hear, the person most transformed by an act of true generosity is never the recipient. It is always the giver. When you give without keeping score, you are making a profound statement about who you are and how you see the world. You are saying, I have enough to share. You are saying, I trust that the universe is not a zero-sum game. You are saying, my worth is not measured by what I receive in return. And in saying all of that, you begin to believe it. And in believing it, you begin to live it. And in living it, the gratitude that has been waiting quietly at the edges of your life finally has room to move in. Generosity is not just an act of kindness toward others. It is an act of profound kindness toward yourself. There is a woman named Grace who volunteered every Saturday morning at a food bank in her city. She had started going during a particularly dark period in her own life. A divorce, a financial strain, a loneliness she didn't know how to name. She went the first time because a friend dragged her. She went the second time because she had nothing else to do. She went the third time because something had shifted and she couldn't quite explain what. By the end of the first month, she said something had happened to her sense of time, that on Saturday mornings the hours felt different, fuller, more real. She said, when I am there, I am not thinking about my divorce or my bank account or whether anyone loves me. I am just handing someone a bag of groceries and watching their face. And in that moment, nothing is missing. Nothing at all. She wasn't receiving anything. No payment, no recognition, no return on her investment of time. And yet she described those Saturday mornings as the most consistently fulfilling hours of her week. She had accidentally discovered what the research confirms, and what the wisest humans throughout history have always known. You cannot outgive the universe, and the moment you stop trying to is the moment giving becomes one of the greatest joys of being alive. Here are 3 ways to begin practicing unconditional generosity starting today. The first is to give something with no return address. Do something kind for someone and tell no one. Not on social media, not to a friend over coffee, not even as a quiet mention in conversation. Let the giving be entirely between you and the act itself. Notice what that feels like. Notice the difference between giving that seeks an audience and giving that simply is. The second is to close an old ledger. Think of someone toward whom you have been carrying a quiet resentment because the giving felt unbalanced, and make a decision, not for their sake, but for yours, to forgive the debt, to write it off entirely, not because they deserve it, but because you deserve to put down the weight of keeping score, because the ledger was never protecting you, it was only exhausting you. And the third is to give your full attention. In a world of constant distraction, undivided attention has become one of the rarest and most precious gifts one human being can offer another. The next time someone is talking to you, someone who matters to you, put everything down, look at them, really listen. Not to respond, not to fix, not to half hear while composing your reply, but to truly receive what they are offering you. That quality of presence is a form of generosity more powerful than most people will ever understand. Before we move forward, I want to leave you with something simple. Think of one person in your life who could use something from you right now, not something expensive or elaborate. Maybe just a message that says, I was thinking of you. Maybe a phone call you have been putting off. Maybe showing up in a small way for someone who has been carrying something heavy. Give it freely. Give it without expectation. Give it without logging it in any ledger, visible or invisible. And then notice what happens inside you afterward. That quiet warmth, that subtle expansion in your chest, that feeling of having been, even briefly, exactly who you wanted to be. That feeling is not a side effect of generosity. That feeling is the point. Give without keeping score. That is secret number 5. And in the giving, you will find one of the most unexpected sources of gratitude you have ever known. In Chapter 6, we turn to one of the quietest and most persistent battles most people fight every single day. The battle that happens not out in the world, but in the mirror, the battle against the voice that says you are not enough, not thin enough, not successful enough, not smart enough, not far enough along. Secret number 6, embrace your enoughness. That's next. Chapter 6, embrace your enoughness. There is a girl who has been running a race her entire life. Not a race against other people, though she has run that one too, but a race against a version of herself that doesn't exist yet. A future self who is thinner, more disciplined, more successful, more polished, more worthy of the life she wants to live. She has been running toward that version of herself since she was 17 years old. She is 39 now, and the finish line has never once gotten closer, because every time she makes progress, loses the weight, gets the promotion, achieves the thing, the future self moves, the standard shifts, the bar rises, and the version of herself she is running toward remains exactly as far away as she has always been. She is exhausted, not from the effort, though the effort has been enormous. She is exhausted from the verdict she has been carrying in her chest since the beginning. The quiet, relentless verdict that says, not yet, not quite, almost, but not enough. She has never once, in 22 years of running, stopped to ask who set the finish line, or whether it was ever meant to be reached at all. Secret number 6 is this: you are not a project to be completed. You are a person to be lived. And the life you are waiting to fully inhabit, the one you have placed on hold, until you become the better version, the finished version, the version finally worthy of full participation, that life is happening right now, without you, while you wait. Enoughness is not a destination. It is not a weight on a scale or a number in a bank account or a title on a business card. It is not something you earn after sufficient self-improvement or unlock after enough achievement. It is a decision, a radical, countercultural, quietly revolutionary decision to say, I am a work in progress and I am also enough. Right now, as I am, with everything I have not yet figured out and everything I have not yet become. Both things are true simultaneously. You can be growing and enough. You can be imperfect and enough. You can be unfinished and enough. In fact, you will always be unfinished. Every human being who has ever lived has died mid-sentence. Incompletion is not a flaw of the human condition. It is the definition of it. The question is not, will you ever be finished? The question is, will you ever give yourself permission to be enough while the work continues? Dr. Kristen Neff, a pioneering researcher at the University of Texas, has spent decades studying self-compassion, the practice of treating yourself with the same kindness and understanding you would offer a close friend. Her findings are both clear and quietly devastating in their implications. People with high levels of self-compassion, those who have learned to embrace their own imperfection without harsh self-judgment, consistently report higher levels of happiness, greater emotional resilience, more authentic relationships, and lower levels of anxiety and depression. They are not less motivated. They are not less ambitious. In fact, they show greater willingness to try new things, take healthy risks, and persist through failure, precisely because they are not terrified of their own judgment when things go wrong. Meanwhile, people who practice chronic self-criticism, who drive themselves with an inner voice that is harsh, demanding, and conditionally loving, show higher rates of burnout, anxiety, shame, and paradoxically, lower achievement over time. The whip, it turns out, is one of the least effective motivational tools in existence. You do not become your best self by hating your current self into improvement. You become your best self by caring enough about your current self to want better, and by being kind enough to yourself to believe that better is possible. Here is your 6th challenge. And I want you to approach this one with particular gentleness, because for many people this is the most tender ground in the entire book. I want you to think about the voice inside your head, the one that comments on your performance, your appearance, your choices, your progress, the one that was there when you made the mistake, when you looked in the mirror this morning, when you compared your chapter 3 to someone else's chapter 20. Now, I want you to listen to the tone of that voice, not just what it says, but how it says it. Is it patient or impatient? Encouraging or contemptuous? Does it sound like someone who believes in you or someone who has already decided you will fall short? And then I want you to ask yourself this one question. Would I speak to someone I love the way I speak to myself? For most people, the answer is an uncomfortable no. We would never say to a friend what we routinely say to ourselves in the privacy of our own minds. We would never greet a loved one's failure with the contempt we reserve for our own. We would never withhold love from someone we care about until they met a standard we decided was worthy. And yet we do all of this to ourselves, every day, without question, as if we deserve less grace than everyone else we have ever loved. You don't. You never did. I want to address something that comes up every time this conversation happens, because someone is always thinking it. Maybe you are thinking it right now. If I accept myself as I am, won't I stop trying to improve? If I decide I am enough, won't I become complacent? Won't I lose my edge? Won't I just settle? And the answer, backed by research, by wisdom, and by the lived experience of every person who has genuinely done this work, is no, absolutely not. Because here is what you discover when you truly embrace your enoughness. You don't stop growing. You grow differently. You grow from a place of desire instead of desperation, from curiosity instead of shame, from love instead of fear. Growth driven by self-loathing is exhausting and brittle. It requires constant fuel, constant dissatisfaction to keep moving. And it poisons every achievement, because no achievement ever feels like enough to a person who has decided they are not. But growth driven by self-acceptance is sustainable and joyful. It says, I am enough and I want more, not because more will make me worthy, but because I am already worthy and I am curious about what I am capable of. That is not complacency, that is freedom, and it is from that freedom that the most authentic, meaningful, and lasting growth of your life will come. There was a man named Daniel who spent the first 40 years of his life achieving, not because he loved achieving, but because somewhere along the way he had made a decision, so early he couldn't remember making it, that his worth was directly tied to his output, that he was only as valuable as his last success. That love, real love, the kind that didn't have conditions, was something he had to earn every single day or risk losing entirely. He built a successful business. He built a beautiful family. From the outside, his life was the picture of a man who had made it. From the inside, it was the picture of a man who was terrified that tomorrow it would all be taken away, not because of circumstance, but because someone would finally see through him and realize he had never actually been enough to deserve any of it. He spent 3 years in therapy before he could say the following sentence out loud without his voice breaking. I am enough, not because of what I have built, not because of what I provide, not because of what I achieve, just I am enough. He said it was the hardest sentence he had ever spoken and the most liberating. He said, I had spent 40 years building a case for my own worthiness, and the whole time the verdict was never actually in question. I just didn't know that I was allowed to read it. You are allowed to read it. The verdict has always been in your favor. Here are 3 practices to begin embracing your enoughness today. The first is to rewrite your inner voice. When you notice the harsh internal commentary beginning, the not good enough, not far enough, not thin enough, not ready enough, pause and deliberately rephrase it the way you would, for someone you love. Not with empty affirmations that your brain won't believe, but with the honest, patient, fair voice of a mentor who sees both your struggle and your potential. I am still learning this. I am making progress. I am doing the best I can with what I have right now. That voice, practiced consistently, becomes the default over time. The second is to separate your worth from your performance. Your value as a human being is not a variable. It does not go up when you succeed and down when you fail. It does not increase with your productivity or decrease with your mistakes. Create a clear internal boundary between who you are and what you do. What you do can always be improved. Who you are was never the problem. And the third is to practice receiving. For many people who struggle with enoughness, receiving is one of the hardest things to do. Receiving a compliment without deflecting it. Receiving help without apologizing for needing it. Receiving love without immediately asking what you did to deserve it. Practice letting good things land. Practice saying thank you and nothing else. Practice believing, even for just a moment, that you are worthy of what is being offered, because you are. You have always been. I want to end this chapter with something I want you to do tonight. Not tomorrow, tonight. I want you to write down, or simply say out loud, alone in whatever private space you can find, 3 things about yourself that you genuinely appreciate. Not achievements, not things you have done. Things about who you are, your kindness, your resilience, your humor, your loyalty, your capacity to love, your willingness to keep trying even when it is hard. And when the voice tries to qualify them, to add a but or an except or a not always, I want you to notice that voice. And I want you to speak a little louder than it. You have been waiting for permission to feel enough, for the grade, the number, the nod of approval, the moment everything finally falls into place and someone or something tells you that you have made it. I am telling you now, you have made it. You are here, you are trying, you are reading a book about becoming better because you care about your life and the people in it. That is not nothing, that is everything. Embrace your enoughness. That is secret number 6. And it is, perhaps, the one that makes all the others possible. In Chapter 7, we step outside ourselves once more, because as important as the inner work is, and it is deeply important, no human being was designed to walk this life alone. The quality of your connections will determine the quality of your existence more than almost anything else. And most of us are starving for something deeper than what we have been settling for. Secret number 7, cultivate deep connections. That's next. Chapter 7, cultivate deep connections. There is a study that has been running since 1938. It began at Harvard University, and it is the longest study of adult life ever conducted. For more than 80 years, researchers have followed the same group of people, tracking their health, their careers, their relationships, their happiness, through every decade of their lives. Through war and peace, through success and failure, through youth and old age. The study has produced mountains of data, thousands of pages of findings, decades of analysis, and after more than 80 years, after tracking every variable imaginable, the researchers arrived at a conclusion so simple it almost feels anticlimactic, so obvious that you might be tempted to nod and move past it without letting it truly land. The people who were happiest, the people who lived the longest, the people who reported the deepest sense of fulfillment and gratitude for their lives were not the wealthiest, not the most successful, not the most accomplished or the most admired. They were the most connected. Not connected in the way we use that word today, followers and contacts and networks and LinkedIn endorsements. Connected in the oldest, most human sense of the word. They had people who knew them, people who showed up, people with whom they could be fully, unguardedly, imperfectly themselves. That after 80 years of research, is the answer. Not a supplement, not a strategy, not a success formula. People, real ones, who really know you. Secret number 7 is this: the depth of your connections is the depth of your life. Not the number of them, not the impressiveness of them, not the social capital they represent, or the doors they can open, or the status they confer. The depth, the realness, the degree to which another human being truly sees you and chooses to stay. We are living through a loneliness epidemic that no one wants to talk about at dinner parties. More people than ever are technically connected. More messages sent, more profiles followed, more contacts accumulated, and more people than ever report feeling profoundly, achingly alone. Not because human beings have changed, but because the way we relate to each other has been quietly hollowed out. We perform our lives for audiences instead of living them with companions. We share highlights instead of truths. We accumulate connections instead of cultivating them. We mistake familiarity for intimacy and presence for closeness, and we wonder why. Surrounded by people, by noise, by constant contact, we still feel like no one really knows us. Deep connection is not an accident. It is not something that happens to the lucky few whose circumstances align just right. It is a practice, a choice, a daily decision to invest in the relationships that matter, with the time, the honesty, the vulnerability, and the attention they require to become truly alive. The Harvard study I mentioned at the opening was led for many years by psychiatrist Robert Waldinger, whose TED Talk on the findings has been viewed tens of millions of times. His conclusion was unambiguous. Good relationships keep us happier and healthier, period. But the research goes deeper than happiness. Studies have found that social isolation is as damaging to physical health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. That loneliness accelerates cognitive decline, weakens immune function, and dramatically increases the risk of early death. That the quality of a person's relationships at age 50 is a more reliable predictor of their health at 80 than their cholesterol levels. Your relationships are not a luxury. They are not the soft, emotional, optional part of a well-lived life that you get to when the serious business is handled. They are the serious business. They are the infrastructure of your health, your happiness, your longevity, and your gratitude. The people in your life, the real ones, the deep ones, are not separate from your well-being. They are a direct biological requirement for it. Here is your 7th challenge, and this one asks you to be honest about something most people avoid examining too closely. Think about your closest relationships right now, the 2 or 3 people who know you most deeply, and ask yourself, when did I last truly invest in those relationships? Not a text, not a like, not a quick catch-up over coffee, where you both said fine when someone asked how you really were. When did you last sit with someone who matters to you and ask a question you genuinely didn't know the answer to? When did you last share something true about yourself? Not the polished version, not the highlight reel version, but the actual unedited version of what is happening inside you right now. And then ask yourself this: is there a relationship in your life that used to be deep and has slowly, through nothing more than neglect and busyness, drifted toward the surface? A friendship that used to hold your whole heart and now only sees the version of you that is doing fine. A family member you love deeply but have somehow stopped truly knowing. Because here is what I want you to understand about deep connections. They do not maintain themselves. They require tending, like gardens. They need regular attention, honest conversation, the willingness to show up even when it is inconvenient, and the courage to go beneath the surface when the surface would be so much easier. The relationship you are thinking of right now, the one that used to be deeper, it is not gone. It is just waiting, and it is probably waiting for you to go first. There is a reason why deep connection is so rare, and it is not because people don't want it. Almost everyone wants it. It is because deep connection requires the one thing that our entire modern culture has trained us to avoid: vulnerability. To be truly known by another person, you have to let them see you, not the version of you that has it together, not the version that is confident and capable and always doing well, the version that is scared sometimes, that doubts itself, that has made mistakes it is not proud of, and carries wounds it hasn't fully healed and questions it cannot answer. That version, the real one. And yes, showing that version to another person is terrifying, because what if they see it and pull away? What if the real you, unfiltered and unpolished, is too much or not enough or simply more than they signed up for? But here is what researcher Brené Brown found after years of studying human connection. Vulnerability is not the obstacle to deep connection. It is the path to it, the only path. There is no other route. Every deep relationship you have ever had, every connection that truly held you, was built on a moment when someone chose to be real, when someone said the true thing instead of the easy thing, when someone showed up as themselves instead of as the person they thought they were supposed to be. You cannot connect deeply with a performance. You can only connect deeply with a person. And becoming a person, fully, bravely, authentically, is the only invitation that deep connection will ever respond to. Two men had been friends since college. For 20 years, they had maintained what looked from the outside like a close friendship. They watched games together, went on occasional trips, texted regularly, showed up at each other's significant life events. But somewhere along the way, somewhere between the careers and the families and the mortgages and the relentless forward motion of adult life, they had stopped actually talking. They had conversations constantly, but they had stopped talking about the real things, about the fear and the doubt and the quiet disappointments and the questions that kept them up at night. One evening, one of them, his name was Marcus, called his friend at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday for no particular reason, and instead of saying the usual things, he said something different. He said, "I need to tell you something. I have been really struggling lately, and I don't think I've told anyone the truth about it." There was a long silence on the other end of the phone, and then his friend said, "I have been waiting for one of us to say something real for about 3 years. They talked until after midnight, about things they had never said out loud to anyone, about fears they had been performing their way around, about the gap between the life they were living and the life they had imagined they would be living by now." Marcus said later that the conversation felt like surfacing after a long time underwater. He said, "I didn't realize how lonely I had been inside a friendship I thought I had, and I didn't realize how much I needed someone to actually know me until someone finally did. One phone call, one moment of choosing truth over performance. That is how deep connections are made, and that is how lost ones are found." Here are 3 ways to begin cultivating deeper connections starting this week. The first is to ask better questions. Most conversations stay shallow because the questions we ask invite shallow answers. How are you? How is work? How are the kids? These are not questions. They are social formalities, and they produce social formalities in return. Try asking something real instead. What has been on your mind lately that you haven't talked about much? What is something you are genuinely excited about right now? What has been harder than you expected this year? These questions signal to the other person that you are not just making conversation. You are making contact, and most people, given genuine permission to go deeper, will take it with both hands. The second is to protect your time for the people who matter most. Deep connection cannot happen in the margins of a life that has no margins. It requires unhurried time, unscheduled time, time that is not squeezed between 2 other obligations and glancing at a phone. Decide, not theoretically but practically in your actual calendar, that the relationships that matter most will receive the time they need, not the time that is left over. real time, protected time, time that says, you matter enough to be a priority. And the third is to go first. In every relationship, there is usually one person who goes first, who asks the real question first, who shares the true thing first, who reaches out after the silence has gone on too long first. Be that person, not because it is your responsibility, but because the connection you are both waiting for will not happen until someone decides that the risk of depth is worth more than the safety of the surface. Go first. Every single time, it will change your relationships in ways you cannot yet imagine. Before we move to secret number 8, I want to leave you with something that I hope you will carry for a long time. At the end of your life, and I say this not to be morbid, but to be useful, you will not think about your inbox. You will not review your career highlights, or calculate your net worth, or scroll through your achievements one last time. You will think about faces, voices, hands, moments when someone truly saw you and you truly saw them, and for a little while the world made complete sense because you were not alone in it. Those moments are available to you right now, today, not after you have more time or more courage or a better version of yourself to offer. Now, with the people already in your life, waiting, perhaps without knowing it, for you to go a little deeper, pick up the phone, send the message, say the true thing, ask the real question, show up for the conversation that has been waiting to happen. Cultivate deep connections. That is secret number 7, and it is, without question, one of the most grateful decisions you will ever make. In Chapter 8, we turn to something that quietly shapes every area of your life, whether you are conscious of it or not. Your values. The things you say matter most, and the way you actually spend your days. And for many people, there is a gap between those two things. A gap that creates a low-level but persistent sense of emptiness that no achievement and no relationship can fill. Secret number 8, live closer to your values. That's next. Chapter 8, live closer to your values. There is a woman named Claire who could not understand why she felt so empty. From the outside, her life made perfect sense. She had followed the script faithfully and without complaint. Good school, respectable career, sensible choices, responsible decisions. She had done everything she was supposed to do in the order she was supposed to do it. But at 42, she sat across from a therapist for the first time and said something she had never said out loud before. She said, "I feel like I have been living someone else's life, like I built everything correctly according to a blueprint I never actually chose. And now I am standing inside this perfectly constructed life, and I feel like a stranger in it." The therapist asked her one question, just one. What do you actually value most? Claire opened her mouth to answer, and nothing came out, not because she didn't have values, but because she had never once stopped long enough to ask herself what they were. She had been so busy building the life she was supposed to want that she had never stopped to examine whether it was the life she actually did. She sat in that office for a long time, in the silence of a question she should have asked herself 20 years earlier. What do I actually value most? That question, honestly answered and honestly lived, is the entire substance of secret number 8. Secret number 8 is this: you cannot feel genuinely fulfilled living in contradiction to what you truly value. You can be successful, you can be comfortable, you can be busy and productive, and by every external measure appear to be thriving. But if the way you spend your days is fundamentally misaligned with what matters most to you at your core, there will always be a gap, a quiet, persistent, low-frequency emptiness that follows you from achievement to achievement, from role to role, from decade to decade, whispering that something essential is missing. That gap is not a character flaw. It is not ingratitude or restlessness or a sign that you are difficult to please. It is information. It is your deepest self sending you a signal, in the only language it knows, that the life you are living and the life you were meant to live have drifted apart. Values alignment is not a luxury reserved for the philosophically inclined or the financially free. It is a fundamental human need, as real and as urgent as food, as shelter, as connection. When you live in alignment with your values, when the way you spend your time and energy and attention genuinely reflects what you believe matters most, something settles inside you. A quiet rightness, a sense of integrity that has nothing to do with morality and everything to do with wholeness. That wholeness, that sense of living from the inside out rather than the outside in, is one of the deepest sources of gratitude and fulfillment available to a human being. And it begins with a single, honest, courageous question: what do I actually value most? Psychologist Shalom Schwartz spent decades researching human values across cultures and countries. His work identified a set of core values that appear consistently across human beings, regardless of where they were born or how they were raised. Things like autonomy, creativity, security, achievement, connection, benevolence, tradition, and freedom. What his research found, and what has been confirmed by study after study since, is that people who are able to identify their core values clearly and who make choices that reflect those values consistently report significantly higher levels of life satisfaction, psychological well-being, and, crucially for our conversation, gratitude. Because here is what happens when you live in alignment with your values. You stop spending your energy on things that don't matter to you. You stop performing for audiences whose approval you never actually wanted. You stop climbing ladders that are leaning against the wrong walls, and you start directing the finite, irreplaceable hours of your life toward the things that genuinely fill you. And when you do that, when your life actually reflects your values, you find that you have far more to be grateful for than you realized. Not because your circumstances changed, but because you finally started living in them honestly. Here is your 8th challenge. And this one I want you to give real time to, not just a passing thought, but a genuine, unhurried examination. I want you to make 2 lists. The first list is your stated values, the things you would say matter most to you if someone asked. Family, creativity, freedom, health, honesty, contribution, adventure, peace. Write them down. 5 to 10 things that you genuinely believe are most important in a life well lived. The second list is your lived values, not what you say matters, but what your calendar, your bank statement, your daily habits, and your recurring choices say matters. Where does your time actually go? Where does your energy actually go? What do you consistently prioritize when you have to choose? Now compare the 2 lists. For most people, and I want you to be prepared for this, the lists will not match. The gap between them is not a moral failing. It is simply the distance between the person you intend to be and the person your daily choices are currently building. And that gap, once you can see it clearly, is not a source of shame. It is a map that shows you exactly where to begin. I want to say something carefully here because it matters, and it is easy to misunderstand. Living closer to your values does not always mean blowing up your life. It does not always mean quitting your job, ending relationships, moving to another country, or making grand dramatic gestures toward authenticity. Sometimes it does mean those things, but far more often it means something quieter and more immediate. It means saying no to the commitment that pulls you away from what matters so you can say yes to the one that doesn't. It means protecting Sunday mornings for the people you love instead of the inbox that will always have more in it tomorrow. It means choosing the honest conversation over the comfortable silence. It means making one small daily decision that is aligned with who you actually are rather than who the situation seems to require you to be. Values alignment is rarely a single dramatic choice. It is 1,000 small ones, made daily, made with intention, made with the quiet courage of someone who has decided that the gap between the life they are living and the life they actually want is no longer acceptable. And here is what happens as those small choices accumulate. The gap begins to close. The emptiness begins to fill. The sense of living someone else's life begins to dissolve. And in its place grows something rare and deeply sustaining. The feeling of integrity, of wholeness, of a life that is genuinely, recognizably, unapologetically yours. That feeling is gratitude in its purest form. There was a man named James who spent 17 years in a career that paid exceptionally well and meant almost nothing to him. He was good at it, talented even, which made it harder to leave because talent is easy to confuse with calling. Every Sunday evening, the same dread arrived, predictable as weather, a heaviness in the chest that had nothing to do with the work itself and everything to do with the quiet knowledge that tomorrow he would spend another day building something he didn't believe in, for reasons that had made sense at 24 and made less sense with every passing year. His core value, the one that had been trying to surface his entire adult life, was contribution, not comfort, not status, not financial security. Though he had told himself for 17 years that was the point. What he actually needed at the deepest level was to matter, to do work that changed something in someone's life in a way he could see and feel and know. At 41, he took a significant pay cut to join a nonprofit working with at-risk youth in his city. His lifestyle changed. His title changed. His Sunday evenings changed completely. He said, "I used to dread Monday mornings more than I can describe. Now I am genuinely impatient for them, not because the work is easy, it is the hardest thing I have ever done, but because for the first time in my adult life I am spending my days on something I actually believe matters." And that feeling, that alignment between what I value and how I live, is worth more than anything the other life was paying me. James did not find a perfect life. He found an aligned one. And the difference between those two things is the difference between a life you endure and a life you are genuinely grateful for. Here are 3 practices to begin living closer to your values starting today. The first is to identify your top 3 values with precision, not a long list of admirable qualities, but the 3 things that, if absent from your life, would make everything else feel hollow. Getting specific matters here, not just family, but present, unhurried, fully engaged time with the people I love most. Not just health, but the physical vitality and mental clarity to show up fully for everything that matters to me. Precision turns a value from a vague aspiration into a compass you can actually navigate by. The second is to run a values audit on your week. At the end of each week, ask yourself one simple question. Did the way I spent my time this week reflect my top 3 values? Not perfectly. Perfection is not the standard, but genuinely. Was there real evidence in my actual days that these things matter to me? If yes, build on it. If no, identify one specific change you can make next week to close the gap by even a small amount. And the third is to make one values-based decision every day, just one. A small, concrete choice that is driven not by convenience or habit or external expectation, but by your values. Choosing the conversation over the screen, choosing the creative project over the comfortable distraction, choosing the honest word over the easy one. One decision every day, compounded over months and years. These small choices become the architecture of a life you are deeply, genuinely grateful to be living. Before we move forward, I want to leave you with an image that I hope stays with you. Imagine standing at the end of your life, not with dread, but with the clear-eyed perspective that only that vantage point provides, and looking back at the years you were given, the days you spent, the choices you made, the things you prioritized, and the things you let slide. The question you will ask yourself in that moment will not be, did I achieve enough? It will not be, was I impressive enough or productive enough or successful enough by whatever standard the world was using at the time. The question will be simpler and far more searching than any of those. Did I live like I meant it? Did the way I spent my days reflect what I actually believed mattered? Was the life I lived, imperfect and unfinished as all lives are, genuinely, recognizably mine? You still have time to answer that question with a yes. Not by reinventing your entire existence overnight, but by beginning today to close the gap. One small, honest, values-driven choice at a time. Live closer to your values. That is secret number 8. And it is the difference between a life that looked good and a life that felt true. In Chapter 9, we confront something that quietly consumes more human energy than almost anything else. The endless, exhausting, ultimately futile effort to control the uncontrollable. The white-knuckled grip on outcomes, on other people, on the future, and the tremendous peace that becomes available the moment you finally truly let go. Secret number 9. Release what you cannot control. Chapter 9. Release what you cannot control. There is an old story about a sailor who spent his entire career fighting the ocean. Every storm that came he met with clenched fists and a rigid jaw and the absolute conviction that if he worked hard enough, planned carefully enough, gripped the wheel tightly enough, he could overpower it. He could force the sea to cooperate. He could bend the weather to his will through sheer determination and refusal to yield. He was an exceptional sailor, skilled, experienced, decorated, and he spent every voyage exhausted, not from the work of sailing, but from the work of resisting, from the constant, draining, ultimately futile effort of fighting something that was never going to change its nature, no matter how hard he pushed back. One evening late in his career, a younger sailor asked him what the ocean had taught him over all those years. He was quiet for a long time, and then he said, "It taught me that the water doesn't care how hard you grip the wheel. It taught me that the storm is going to do what the storm is going to do. And it taught me that the sailors who survive the longest are not the ones who fight the sea the hardest. They are the ones who learn, eventually, and usually the hard way, to work with it." He paused, and then he said something the young sailor never forgot. "The ocean never asked for my permission, and the day I stopped waiting for it to was the day I finally learned how to sail." Secret number 9 is this: the pursuit of control over things you cannot control is not strength. It is one of the most sophisticated and socially acceptable forms of suffering available to human beings, and it is costing you something precious. Not just your peace, though it is absolutely costing you that. It is costing you your presence, your joy, your ability to be grateful for what is, because you are too consumed by anxiety about what might be, or resentment about what was, or desperate effort to manage outcomes that were never yours to manage in the first place. Here is the hard, clarifying truth that this secret asks you to sit with. There are very few things in this life that you actually control. Your thoughts with practice, your responses with discipline, your effort, your integrity, your values, your attitude. These are yours. These are the things over which you have genuine dominion. Everything else, other people's choices, the economy, your health, the past, the future, what someone thinks of you, whether the thing you worked for succeeds or fails. These are not yours to control. They never were. And the enormous amount of energy you have been spending trying to control them is energy that has been stolen from the life that is actually happening right in front of you. Releasing what you cannot control is not passivity. It is not resignation or indifference or giving up. It is the profound, courageous act of directing your finite energy toward what is actually within your power, and making peace with everything that is not. The Stoic philosophers understood this distinction 2,000 years ago. Epictetus, a former slave who became one of the most influential philosophers in history, built his entire philosophy around a single division: the things that are up to us and the things that are not. He called it the dichotomy of control, and he taught that the root of virtually all human suffering is the persistent, mistaken belief that we have power over things that we fundamentally do not. Modern psychology has arrived at the same conclusion through a different route. Research on what psychologists call the locus of control, the degree to which people believe they have agency over their lives, consistently shows that the healthiest outcomes belong not to people who believe they control everything, but to people who have developed a nuanced, accurate understanding of what they can and cannot influence. People who focus their energy on their genuine sphere of influence while accepting with equanimity what lies outside it. Neuroscience adds another dimension. The brain's threat response system, the amygdala, activates not just in response to actual danger, but in response to uncertainty and unpredictability. When we try to control uncontrollable outcomes, we are essentially trying to manage our amygdala's response to uncertainty. And the research is clear. The most effective way to reduce that threat response is not to eliminate uncertainty, which is impossible, but to build a genuine tolerance for it, to train the nervous system to remain regulated in the presence of the unknown. That training, that hard-won capacity to be at peace with what you cannot control, is one of the most powerful psychological skills a human being can develop. And it is the foundation of a gratitude that is not contingent on circumstances going your way. Here is your 9th challenge, and this one I want you to approach with both honesty and compassion for yourself. Because what we are about to examine tends to touch places where people carry a great deal of shame. Think about the things in your life that are currently consuming your worry, your anxiety, your mental and emotional energy, the things you lie awake thinking about, the scenarios you rehearse, the outcomes you are desperately trying to engineer or prevent, the people whose choices are keeping you up at night. Now I want you to draw a line down the center of that list. On one side, the things you can genuinely influence: your preparation, your response, your communication, your choices, your effort, real practical actions that are within your actual power. On the other side, everything else. The things that are ultimately outside your control, regardless of how hard you grip, how carefully you plan, or how long you lie awake rehearsing. Look at the second column, really look at it, and then ask yourself, how much of my life am I spending in that column? How much of my precious, irreplaceable time and energy is being consumed by things that are not mine to control? And then ask the question that changes everything. What would become available to me? What peace? What presence? What joy? What gratitude? If I stopped spending myself on things I was never going to be able to control in the first place. I want to talk about something that sits underneath the need to control. Because in my experience, the need for control is almost never really about the things we are trying to control. It is about fear. We control or try to because we are afraid. Afraid of uncertainty, afraid of loss, afraid of being hurt by outcomes we didn't anticipate. Afraid of what it would mean about us if things don't go the way we need them to. Afraid that if we loosen our grip even slightly, the whole thing will fall apart and we will not be able to survive what comes next. And so we grip, and the gripping feels like safety. It feels like responsibility. It feels sometimes like love. I am controlling this because I care so much about how it turns out. But here is what the gripping is actually communicating. Beneath all the effort and all the vigilance and all the white-knuckled management of outcomes, the gripping is saying, I do not trust life. I do not trust that I will be okay if things don't go my way. I do not trust that the universe is not fundamentally hostile, and I do not trust myself to navigate whatever comes. Releasing control is, at its deepest level, an act of trust. Trust in your own resilience, the resilience that every hard chapter in your life has already proven you possess. Trust that uncertainty is not the same as danger. And trust that the energy you free up by letting go of the uncontrollable will be available for the things that genuinely matter. That trust is not naive. It is not the absence of preparation or effort or care. It is the hard-won wisdom of someone who has finally understood the difference between steering and sailing, between directing your life with intention and exhausting yourself trying to control the ocean. There was a woman named Sarah who had spent the better part of a decade trying to control her adult son's choices, not maliciously, deeply lovingly. She loved him in the fierce, consuming way that parents love children who are struggling. And he was struggling, with decisions she could see were hurting him, with a path that seemed from where she stood to be leading somewhere painful. She intervened constantly. She called, she advised. She worried out loud and in private. She lay awake engineering conversations she would have with him, anticipating his responses, preparing her counter-arguments. She spent enormous reserves of her energy trying to redirect a life that was not hers to direct. And nothing changed, not because she didn't love him enough, but because you cannot love someone into choices they are not ready to make. And you cannot control another person's journey no matter how clearly you can see where it is leading. A wise friend said something to her one afternoon that cracked something open. She said, "Sarah, you are so busy trying to live his life for him that you have stopped living yours. And you loving him from a burned-out, anxious, depleted place is not helping either of you. It took time, it took tears and resistance, and the grief of loosening a grip that had felt like love. But she began, slowly, imperfectly, 2 steps forward and 1 step back, to release what she could not control. Something remarkable happened. Not immediately, not dramatically, but over months she began to sleep again, to be present in conversations that weren't about her son, to notice the beauty of ordinary days she had been too exhausted to see, to reconnect with her husband, her friendships, herself. And her son, no longer pushing against the constant pressure of her management, began in his own time and in his own way to find his footing. She said later, "I thought releasing control meant I stopped caring. What it actually meant was that I finally had enough left of myself to love him properly, from a full place instead of an empty one." That is what becomes available when you release what you cannot control. Not indifference, presence, not emptiness, fullness, not the absence of love, the return of it, rested, restored, and finally free. Here are 3 practices to begin releasing what you cannot control starting today. The first is the daily control audit. Each morning, take 60 seconds, just 60 seconds, to identify the one thing you are most anxious about that day. Then ask yourself honestly, is this within my control or outside it? If it is within your control, identify one concrete action you can take and take it. If it is outside your control, write it down, acknowledge it, and make a conscious decision to redirect your energy elsewhere. This simple practice, done consistently, trains the brain to stop defaulting to the anxiety of the uncontrollable and start redirecting toward genuine agency. The second is to practice the phrase, "This is not mine to carry." When you feel the familiar pull of anxiety about something outside your control, a decision someone else is making, an outcome you cannot determine, a future you cannot predict, say it out loud if you can. This is not mine to carry. Not as a denial of the reality or the difficulty, but as a deliberate act of returning the weight to the universe and reclaiming the energy you were about to spend on something you were never going to be able to control anyway. And the third is to expand your comfort with uncertainty. Most of us treat uncertainty as a problem to be solved, rather than a condition to be navigated. But uncertainty is not the enemy of a good life. It is the texture of one. Every good thing that has ever happened to you arrived through a door marked uncertain. Start small. Deliberately leave one small thing unplanned each week. Resist the urge to over-prepare for one conversation. Sit with not knowing the outcome of one situation for longer than is comfortable. Build the muscle of equanimity in small moments so it is available in the large ones. I want to leave you with something that I hope lands gently and stays long. The things you cannot control are not your failures. They are not evidence that you didn't try hard enough, or care deeply enough, or plan carefully enough. They are simply the portions of life that belong to life, not to you. And the sooner you return them to their rightful owner, the sooner you get yourself back. Your peace is not waiting on the other side of a perfectly controlled outcome. It is available right now, in the middle of the uncertainty, in the presence of the unknown, in the imperfect, unpredictable, gloriously uncontrollable reality of being alive. Loosen your grip, not on the things that matter, but on the illusion that your grip is what's holding them together. Trust yourself to handle what comes. You have already handled everything that has come before, every single thing, and you are still here. Release what you cannot control. That is secret number 9, and in the releasing, you will find more peace than any amount of control ever gave you. In Chapter 10, we go somewhere that many people spend their entire lives avoiding. Not the future, we have talked about that, but the past. The chapters behind you that still have weight. The wounds that never fully healed. The moments that still sting when you let yourself think about them. The people you have not forgiven, and perhaps most importantly, the person you have not forgiven most of all. Secret number 10, make peace with your past. That is next. Chapter 10, make peace with your past. There is a woman who carries a stone in her pocket everywhere she goes. Not a real stone, though it weighs as much as one. It is the memory of something that happened to her 14 years ago. A betrayal so precise, so personal, so deeply wounding that it rearranged something fundamental in the way she moved through the world. She doesn't talk about it often. She has gotten very good at not talking about it. But it is always there, in the way she hesitates before trusting someone new, in the wall that goes up just before genuine closeness is possible, in the moments of joy that never quite reach their full height because somewhere underneath them the stone is still there, still heavy, still whispering. Remember what happened the last time you let yourself feel safe. She is not a bitter woman. She is kind and funny and generous and loved by many people, but she is also, in a way she rarely examines and almost never names, still living partly in a moment that ended 14 years ago. She is not unusual. She is, in fact, extraordinarily common. Most of us are carrying stones we were never meant to carry this far, old wounds we have dressed but never truly healed, old stories we have stopped telling out loud but have never stopped telling ourselves, old versions of events that ended long ago but whose final chapter we have somehow never allowed ourselves to write. This chapter is about putting the stone down, not forgetting it was ever there, not pretending it wasn't heavy, but making the decision, conscious, deliberate, and entirely for your own sake, that you are no longer willing to carry it one step further. Secret number 10 is this. Your past is the most permanent thing about you and the least useful thing to live inside of. It is fixed, finished, unchangeable in every detail. Not one moment of it can be altered by the amount of time you spend revisiting it, reliving it, resenting it, or rehearsing what you should have said or done differently. And yet most people spend an extraordinary portion of their present lives inside their past, replaying conversations that ended years ago, nursing grievances that the other person has long since forgotten, carrying guilt about choices that cannot be unmade, punishing themselves for versions of themselves that no longer exist, living in some essential way in a time that is over, while the actual present, with all its possibility and all its beauty, moves past them unattended. Making peace with your past is not the same as endorsing it. It is not pretending the pain wasn't real, or the wound wasn't deep, or the person who hurt you was not wrong. It is not a verdict on what happened. It is a decision about where you choose to live. You can acknowledge that something was genuinely terrible and simultaneously decide that it will not be the address your soul returns to every night. You can hold the truth of what happened and the truth of your own healing at the same time. You can honor the wound without building your life around it. That is not weakness. That is one of the most sophisticated and courageous acts of self-determination available to a human being. It is choosing, in full awareness of everything you have been through, to live forward, to make the present moment more powerful than any past one, to become finally and deliberately someone whose best chapter is still ahead. The neuroscience of memory offers us something remarkable and deeply relevant here. When we recall a memory, any memory, we are not playing back a recording, we are reconstructing it. Each time we revisit a past event, our brain rebuilds it from available fragments, and in the rebuilding, the memory is subtly altered by our current emotional state, our current beliefs, our current interpretation of what it meant. This means that the story you have been telling yourself about your past is not a fixed, objective account of what happened. It is a living narrative, one that you have been rewriting, consciously or not, every time you have revisited it. And because you have been the author of that narrative all along, you have more power over it than you may have realized. Researchers at the University of California found that a practice called expressive writing, writing about painful past experiences in a structured, reflective way, produced measurable improvements in both psychological and physical health. People who wrote about their difficult experiences with an emphasis on meaning, growth, and forward resolution showed reduced cortisol levels, improved immune function, better sleep, and significantly higher reported well-being compared to those who either suppressed the memories or ruminated on them without resolution. The act of making meaning from your past, of finding the narrative thread that runs from what happened to who you became because of it, is not just emotionally useful, it is biologically healing. Your body responds to the story you tell about your history, and you get to choose what that story says. Here is your 10th challenge, and I want to offer it with both honesty and deep gentleness, because for some people this territory is not uncomfortable. It is genuinely painful, and pain deserves to be approached with care. I want you to think about the past that is still present in your life. The memory or the season or the person that still has a hold on you, not because you choose to think about it, but because it chooses you. It arrives uninvited. It colors moments that should be free of it. It sits in the corner of rooms where it was never invited. Now I want you to ask yourself 3 questions, and please, take your time. The first, what is the story I have been telling myself about this? Not just what happened, but the meaning I have attached to it. What did it say about me, about others, about life, about what I deserve or what I am capable of? Because the story you tell about what happened is often more influential than what actually happened itself. The second, who have I become because of this? Not who was I wounded into, but who was I forged into? What capacity, what understanding, what depth did this experience produce in you that you would not have without it? Not to justify the pain, but to refuse to let it have been only pain. And the third, what would it feel like to put this down? Not to forget it, not to pretend it was acceptable, but to genuinely release it from its position as the stone in your pocket that you carry everywhere. What would become possible in your life if this no longer had the weight it currently has? Sit with those questions. Let them do their work, because the answers, when they come honestly, are the beginning of a peace you may have stopped believing was still available to you. I want to spend a moment on forgiveness, because it is inseparable from making peace with the past. and it is one of the most misunderstood concepts in the entire landscape of human healing. Forgiveness is not a gift you give to the person who hurt you. It is a gift you give to yourself. It is not an absolution of their behavior. It is not a declaration that what they did was acceptable or that the wound was not real. It is not reconciliation. You can forgive someone completely and never speak to them again. It is not forgetting. The memory does not have to disappear for the forgiveness to be genuine. Forgiveness is simply the decision to stop letting someone else's past actions determine your present quality of life. It is the moment you say, "I refuse to allow what you did to me to continue costing me my peace, my joy, my presence, and my gratitude. Not for your sake, for mine." The Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh described holding on to resentment as drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die. The unforgiven person goes about their life, often entirely unaware of or indifferent to the weight you are carrying on their behalf, while you pay the price every day in lost peace, in stolen present moments, in a past that keeps reaching into your future and rearranging the furniture. Forgiveness does not require the other person to apologize. It does not require them to understand, to change, to acknowledge what they did. It requires only one person, and that person is you. And perhaps the most important forgiveness of all, the one that for many people is the hardest and the most transformative, is the forgiveness of yourself. For the choices you made that you would not make today, for the version of you that didn't know better, for the moments of weakness, of fear, of selfishness, of failure that you have been prosecuting internally for years with a harshness you would never direct at any other human being. That person, the one you have been putting on trial in your own mind, did the best they could with what they had at the time they had it. That is the truth, not an excuse, a truth. And it is a truth that deserves, that requires your forgiveness. There was a man named Thomas who had not spoken to his father in 11 years. The estrangement had begun over something real, a pattern of behavior in his childhood that had left genuine wounds. The silence had been necessary at first, a boundary drawn from a place of genuine self-protection. But over 11 years, the silence had become something else. It had hardened from a boundary into a prison. Not for his father, who had grown old and quiet and, by all accounts, genuinely remorseful in ways he lacked the language to express, but for Thomas, who carried the weight of the unresolved relationship into every room he entered, who flinched at father figures in films, who felt a complicated, unnameable grief every Father's Day that he had learned to paper over with busyness. He did not reconcile with his father. That was not the path available to him, and he did not force it. But at the encouragement of a therapist, he wrote his father a letter he never sent. 3 pages of everything he had never said. The hurt, the anger, the grief, the complicated love that had survived underneath all of it. Battered and confused, but still alive. And then he wrote something he had not planned to write. He wrote, "I am releasing this, not because you deserve to be released, but because I deserve to be free." He said that writing that sentence felt like setting down something he had been carrying for so long he had forgotten it wasn't part of his body. His father died 2 years later. Thomas went to the funeral. He stood at the grave for a long time in the rain, and he felt not the clean resolution of a story with a tidy ending, but something quieter and more real, a completion, an acceptance, a peace that had arrived not because everything had been fixed, but because he had finally, at long last, stopped waiting for it to be. He said, "I spent 11 years thinking that peace would come when my father became someone different. It came when I stopped needing him to. It came when I chose it, and I wish, more than almost anything, that I had chosen it sooner." I want to close this chapter with something I want you to carry very carefully, because it is both simple and profound, and easy to rush past without letting it fully arrive. You are not your past. You are not the worst thing that was done to you. You are not the worst thing you ever did. You are not the sum of your mistakes or your wounds or your hardest seasons. You are not the story that fear has been telling about you since the day something broke. You are, right now, in this moment, listening to these words, a person with more life ahead of them than behind them in terms of what is still possible, in terms of who you can still become, in terms of the mornings that are still coming and the connections still waiting to be made, and the version of yourself that is still being assembled from everything you have survived, and everything you have learned, and everything you have refused to stop reaching for. The past is not a place you were meant to live. It is a place you were meant to learn from. You have learned from it. You have earned from it. Now, with every hard-won lesson in your hands and the present moment waiting patiently at your feet, it is time to leave it there. Make peace with your past. That is secret number 10. And in making that peace, you will finally have the room, the energy, and the wholeness to fully inhabit the only moment that was ever truly yours. This one, right now, here. In Chapter 11, we take everything we have built across the first 10 secrets, and we ask the most practical question of this entire book. How do I make this last? How do I ensure that what I have learned does not fade, the way inspiration always fades, but instead becomes the actual operating system of my daily life? Because gratitude without practice is just a feeling, and feelings pass. But a practice, a real, consistent daily practice, becomes a way of seeing, a way of being, a way of living that changes everything it touches. Secret number 11. Choose gratitude as a daily practice. That is next. Chapter 11. Choose gratitude as a daily practice. There is a woman named Evelyn who woke up every morning for 31 years in a state of low-grade dread. Not panic, nothing dramatic enough to name or treat or talk about at dinner parties. Just a quiet, persistent heaviness that arrived before she was fully conscious, before the day had offered a single reason for it. A gray film over the morning that she had come to accept the way you accept weather, as something that simply was beyond her influence or her choice. She was not depressed. She functioned well. She loved her family, performed well at work, laughed genuinely at things that were funny. But underneath the functioning, underneath the laughing, underneath the life that looked from the outside like a perfectly normal one, there was this, the gray film, the dread without a name, the sense that the day was a weight to be carried rather than a gift to be opened. 1 January, not a milestone year, not after a dramatic event, not following a revelation of any particular significance. She began a practice, small, unglamorous, taking less than 5 minutes. Every morning before her feet hit the floor, she wrote down 3 things she was grateful for, not profound things, not life-changing things. The coffee that was already brewing because she had set the timer the night before, the sound of her daughter moving around in the next room, the fact that it was Friday. Small, ordinary, unremarkable things. She did it because a book suggested it. She expected nothing. By the end of the first week, she noticed something she could not immediately explain. The gray film was thinner, not gone, but thinner, as if something in the 5 minutes of deliberate noticing had introduced a small amount of light into a room that had been closed for a very long time. By the end of the first month, it was thinner still. By the end of the first year, 31 years of morning dread had become more mornings than not, something that felt quietly, unexpectedly, like anticipation. Nothing in her life had changed. Her circumstances were identical. Her challenges were the same. The world outside her window was exactly as it had always been. What had changed was where she was pointing her attention, and that, it turned out, changed everything. Secret number 11 is this. Gratitude is not a feeling that visits you when circumstances are good. It is a practice that transforms how you experience circumstances of every kind. The difference between a person who feels deeply grateful and a person who doesn't is rarely a difference in what they have. It is almost always a difference in what they have trained themselves to notice. We have spent 10 chapters examining the secrets that open the door to gratitude. The awareness, the self-acceptance, the healing, the connection, the alignment. These are the foundations. They are essential and they are real. But foundations without a daily practice are like a beautiful house with no one living in it. Structurally sound, entirely uninhabited. A daily gratitude practice is the act of moving in, of showing up every single day, not just when you feel inspired, not just when life is cooperating, not just when the circumstances make it easy, and deliberately, consciously, choosing to look for what is good, what is working, what is present, what is enough. Not because everything is good, it isn't always. Not because nothing is hard, it often is. But because the human brain, as we established in the very first chapter of this book, is wired to scan for threat and problem and lack. And unless you actively, intentionally, repeatedly retrain it to also scan for beauty and abundance and grace, it will default to the negative every single time. A daily gratitude practice is not wishful thinking. It is neuroscience. It is the deliberate rewiring of a brain that was designed for survival into a brain that is capable of joy. The research on gratitude practices is among the most robust and replicable in all of positive psychology. Dr. Robert Emmons of the University of California, Davis, widely considered the world's leading scientific expert on gratitude, has spent decades studying its effects on human well-being. His findings are consistent and compelling. People who maintain a regular gratitude practice, writing, reflecting, or expressing appreciation consistently over time, show measurable increases in positive emotion, life satisfaction, and overall sense of well-being. They report higher energy levels, better sleep quality, and greater resilience in the face of adversity. They show lower rates of envy, resentment, and depression. They are more likely to exercise, more likely to help others, and more likely to describe their lives as meaningful. But perhaps most remarkably, the benefits compound over time. Unlike most interventions whose effects diminish with repetition, a sustained gratitude practice tends to produce increasing returns. The longer you do it, the more natural it becomes. The more natural it becomes, the more your brain begins to do it automatically, scanning for the good not just during the 5 minutes you set aside for it, but throughout the entire texture of your day. Neuroscientists have a phrase for this. Neurons that fire together wire together. Every time you deliberately direct your attention toward what is good in your life, you are strengthening the neural pathways associated with positive perception. You are literally, physiologically building a more grateful brain, one morning at a time. This is not magic, it is not sentiment, it is biology. And it is available to every single person who is willing to show up for it consistently, even on the days when it feels forced, even on the days when the list feels thin, even on the days when gratitude feels like the last thing you have access to, especially on those days. I want to address something that comes up consistently when people begin a gratitude practice, and I want to address it honestly because it is real and it deserves a real response. Sometimes gratitude feels dishonest. Sometimes life is genuinely hard. Sometimes the loss is fresh and the pain is present, and sitting down to write a list of things you appreciate feels not just forced, but almost insulting to the difficulty you are actually experiencing. Like putting a bow on something that has no business being wrapped. I want you to hear this clearly. A gratitude practice is not a bypass around pain. It is not a spiritual shortcut designed to help you avoid feeling what you need to feel. Grief needs to be grieved. Anger needs to be acknowledged. Difficulty needs to be named honestly before it can be moved through with any integrity. But here is what I have found to be true, and what the research consistently confirms. Gratitude and pain are not mutually exclusive. They can coexist in the same moment, in the same heart, without either one canceling the other out. You can be devastated by a loss and still find 3 real things, however small, that make the day worth showing up for. You can be in the middle of a genuinely hard season and still notice with genuine appreciation that someone was kind to you today, that the coffee was good, that the sunset was unreasonably beautiful for a day that had been so difficult. These things do not diminish your pain. They companion it. They say, this is hard, and life is still here, still offering something, still worth paying attention to. That is not toxic positivity. That is resilience. That is the quiet, radical act of a human being who has decided that the darkness does not get to have the last word. And over time, practiced consistently, practiced honestly, practiced not as a performance but as a genuine daily act of attention, that decision accumulates into something remarkable, into a person who can be in the middle of difficulty and still find the light. Not because the difficulty isn't real, but because the light is real too, and they have trained themselves one morning at a time to see both. There was a man named Viktor Frankl who survived the Nazi concentration camps during World War II. He lost nearly everything: his family, his manuscripts, his freedom, his health. He lived through conditions of suffering so extreme that the word suffering feels inadequate to contain them. And yet in the midst of it, in the darkest circumstances imaginable, he made an observation that has since become one of the most quoted insights in the history of psychology. He observed that even in those conditions, those stripped bare, entirely dehumanizing conditions, the last of human freedoms could not be taken from him. The freedom to choose his attitude, the freedom to decide in any given moment how he would respond to what was happening to him. He wrote that men who walked through the huts, comforting others, giving away their last piece of bread, may have been few in number, but they offered sufficient proof that everything can be taken from a person but one thing: the last of human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. I share this not to compare anyone's struggle to the unimaginable suffering of the camps, but to establish something that I believe is the most important truth in this entire chapter. If gratitude, the active, chosen, deliberate turning of attention toward what is still good, was available in those conditions, then it is available in yours. Whatever those conditions currently are, it is always available. It is always a choice. And it is, perhaps, the most powerful choice available to a human being. Here are 5 gratitude practices, ranging from the simplest to the most expansive, so that you can find the ones that fit your life and your temperament most naturally. The first and most foundational is the morning gratitude list. 3 specific things every morning before the day begins. We have discussed this already. Start here, build from here. Everything else is an addition to this foundation, not a replacement for it. The second is the gratitude letter. Once a month, choose one person in your life whose positive impact you have never fully expressed. Write them a letter, not a text, not a social media comment. A real letter that tells them specifically what they have meant to you and why. You do not have to send it. But if you do, research shows it produces one of the largest and most lasting spikes in well-being of any gratitude intervention ever studied, for both the writer and the recipient. The third is the evening review. Before sleep, take 60 seconds to identify the single best moment of your day. Not the most productive moment, not the most impressive one, the one that felt most alive, most real, most worth having been awake for. Name it, sit with it for a moment. Let it be the last thing your mind holds before rest. The fourth is the gratitude pause. When something good happens, however small, resist the instinct to immediately move on to the next thing. Pause for 30 seconds. Feel it. Let it register. Let your nervous system actually receive the good instead of processing it as background data and filing it away unnoticed. Most people spend their lives moving through good moments without ever actually landing in them. The gratitude pause is the practice of landing. And the fifth, the most challenging and most transformative of all, is what I call the difficult gratitude. Once a week, identify one thing that is currently hard in your life and find one genuine reason to be grateful for its presence. Not forced, not performed, a real one. What is it teaching you? What is it building in you? What would you not have? What would you not be without it? This practice alone, done honestly and consistently, will change the way you relate to difficulty in ways that no amount of good times ever could. Before we move to our final chapter, the one that brings everything full circle and sends you back into the world with a purpose larger than yourself, I want to leave you with this. You have now been given 11 secrets, 11 doors into a more grateful, more present, more deeply fulfilled life. And I know, because this is true of every human being who has ever read a book or attended a seminar or listened to something that genuinely moved them, that the feeling you have right now in this moment is real. The intention is real. The desire to live differently is real. And I also know that feelings pass, intentions fade. The urgency of a meaningful moment is always competing with the inertia of an unchanged daily routine. The practice is what bridges the gap. The daily, unglamorous 5-minute show up even when you don't feel like it practice. That is what takes everything you have felt and learned and decided across these chapters and turns it from inspiration into identity, from something you experienced once into someone you actually become. Do not wait for the perfect morning. Do not wait until life settles down or the circumstances improve or you feel more ready. Begin tomorrow. Begin with 3 things. Begin small and begin honestly, and begin without any expectation except this, that you will show up again the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that. Because the person you are becoming, one morning at a time, one deliberate act of noticing at a time, is worth showing up for. Choose gratitude as a daily practice. That is secret number 11, and it is the practice that makes all the other secrets permanent. In our final chapter, we arrive somewhere that I believe will surprise you, because after 10 chapters of turning inward, examining ourselves, healing ourselves, building ourselves, secret number 12 asks us to turn outward one last time. Not to give because we have to, not to contribute because it is virtuous, but because there is a final, profound truth about gratitude that most people never discover. That the fullest expression of feeling enough is becoming a source of enough for someone else. Secret number 12, share your enough with the world. That is next, and it is where everything in this book has been leading. Chapter 12, share your enough with the world. There is a teacher in a small town who will never be famous. She will never write a book or give a TED Talk or be recognized beyond the borders of the community where she has spent her entire career. Her name will not trend. Her story will not go viral. By every metric that the modern world uses to measure a life of significance, she is unremarkable. But in that small town, there are now adults in their 30s and 40s and 50s who became doctors and artists and parents and decent human beings, in part because of something she said to them when they were 9 years old and didn't yet know what they were capable of. There are people who chose kindness in a difficult moment because her voice was somewhere in the back of their mind, reminding them who they wanted to be. There are children being raised by parents who learned from her, without ever knowing they learned it, that every person in a room deserves to feel seen. She has no idea about most of this. The ripples of a life genuinely lived rarely return to their source. But here is what she does know. At the end of every school year, at the end of every ordinary, unglamorous, deeply meaningful day, she goes home feeling something that the most celebrated, most decorated, most externally successful people she has ever met have described to her as enviable. She goes home feeling that she mattered today, not in a grand way, not in a way that will be remembered by history, but in the real way, the human way, the way that counts. She goes home full, and that, the fullness of a life genuinely offered to others, is where our final secret begins. Secret number 12 is this: gratitude that stays inside you is gratitude half-lived. The deepest, most sustaining, most transformative experience of feeling enough does not come from having more or achieving more or becoming more. It comes from the moment you look at what you have. Your time, your story, your presence, your hard-won wisdom, your particular and unrepeatable way of being in the world. And you decide to offer it, not to keep it safe, not to hoard it against future scarcity, but to give it freely, generously, without guarantee of return, to the world that is waiting for exactly what only you can bring. This is the secret beneath all the secrets, the destination that every previous chapter has been preparing you for. Because here is what the journey of this book has been building toward. A person who sees what is already there, who has released the comparison trap, who has found the gift in the difficult and honored the small moments, who gives without keeping score, who has embraced their own enoughness and cultivated deep connections and begun to live closer to their values, who has released what they cannot control and made peace with their past and chosen gratitude as a daily practice. That person, you, the person you are becoming, has something the world desperately needs. Not perfection, not completion, not a finished and polished version of a human life with all the difficult parts resolved and all the questions answered. Just you, aware, present, grateful, imperfect, willing. Just you, showing up with everything you are and everything you have survived and everything you have learned, and offering it in whatever way your particular life makes possible. That offering, that genuine, wholehearted contribution to something beyond yourself, is the final piece of the puzzle, the one that makes everything else make sense, the one that transforms a life from something you are experiencing into something you are building, from a story you are living through into a legacy you are leaving behind. The research on meaning and contribution is as clear as any finding in the science of human well-being. Psychologist Martin Seligman, widely considered the founder of positive psychology, identified 5 core elements of a flourishing human life in his landmark PERMA model: positive emotion, engagement, relationships, meaning, and accomplishment. Of these 5 elements, meaning is consistently identified as the most powerful predictor of long-term life satisfaction, more than positive emotion, more than achievement, more even than relationships, though relationships are the vehicle through which meaning is most often expressed. And meaning, in virtually every study that has examined it, is generated not by what we receive, but by what we contribute. Not by the accumulation of good experiences, but by the sense that our existence has made some difference, however small, however local, however quiet, in the lives of others or in the fabric of the world. Viktor Frankl, whose story we encountered in the previous chapter, identified this as the primary driver of human resilience. People who had a sense of purpose beyond their own survival, something to live for, someone to live for, something to offer, consistently outlasted and outsurvived those who did not. Not because their circumstances were better, but because their reason for being was larger than their suffering. Purpose, the sense that your life is directed toward something beyond itself, is not a luxury of the fortunate. It is a biological necessity of the human spirit. And contribution, the daily, practical act of offering something of yourself to the world, is how purpose becomes real. You do not find your purpose by looking inward indefinitely. You find it by looking outward, by asking not what do I need, but what does the world need that I am uniquely positioned to give. I want you to ask yourself 3 questions, and I want you to sit with them not just for the duration of this chapter, but for as long as it takes to arrive at answers that feel genuinely, unmistakably true. The first, what have I survived or learned or become that someone else, right now, somewhere in the world, desperately needs to hear? Not your credentials, not your achievements, your story, the real one, the one with the difficult chapters and the unexpected turns and the lessons that cost you something real to learn. That story, your story, is not just yours, it is a map. And somewhere there is a person standing exactly where you once stood who would give anything for a glimpse of the terrain ahead. The second, what do I have? In terms of time, skill, presence, resources, or simply attention that I could offer more freely than I currently do, not from depletion, not from guilt, but from the genuine overflow of a person who has done the inner work of this book and arrived at a place where there is something real to give. And the third, what is the smallest, most immediate, most concrete thing I could do today? Not someday, not when I am more ready, not when life settles down, but today, to contribute something of myself to someone or something beyond my own comfort and convenience? Because legacy is not built in grand gestures, it is built in daily ones, in the accumulation of small, consistent, genuine offerings that compound over a lifetime into something that outlasts you in ways you will never fully see or know. Start small, start today, start with what you already have. It is enough. You are enough, and the world is waiting. I want to say something about legacy that I think gets misunderstood, particularly in a culture that has made legacy synonymous with fame, with scale, with the size of the audience that witnesses your contribution. Legacy is not measured in followers. It is not counted in views or citations or the square footage of the buildings that bear your name. Legacy is measured in the only currency that has ever mattered between human beings. Impact, real impact. The kind that changes something in one person, their direction, their belief in themselves, their sense that they are not alone in the world, and that then moves quietly and without credit into the people that person touches and the people those people touch, and forward through time in ways that no algorithm will ever capture and no metric will ever count. The teacher in the story that opened this chapter will never know the full reach of her legacy. The parent whose patience on one difficult Tuesday became the model their child carried into their own parenting 20 years later will never see that return. The friend who said the true thing at exactly the right moment, the thing that stopped someone from making a decision they would have regretted for decades, will likely never know what their honesty prevented. This is the nature of real contribution. It moves beyond you. It multiplies in the dark. It compounds in lives you will never meet. And this is why the question is never, is my contribution significant enough to matter? The question is simply, am I contributing? Am I showing up? Am I offering consistently and genuinely something of myself to the world beyond my own 4 walls? Because if you are, then you are already, right now, in ways you cannot see and may never know, changing things, mattering, leaving something behind that will outlast every possession you have accumulated and every achievement you have logged. That is legacy. Quiet, real, and available to every single human being who chooses it. Regardless of platform, regardless of title, regardless of the size of the stage life has given them to stand on, your stage is wherever you are, and whoever is in front of you, right now, is your audience. I want to tell you about a man named Henry, who retired at 67 after 40 years as a plumber. Not a celebrated career by any measure, not one that generated keynote invitations or magazine profiles or any of the external markers that the world tends to associate with a life well and significantly lived. But Henry had a habit that his colleagues noticed and occasionally teased him about. Whenever he finished a job, particularly in a home where he could sense that things were financially tight, where the repair had been delayed too long because the money wasn't there, he would leave something extra. Sometimes it was a small repair he hadn't been asked to do and didn't charge for. Sometimes it was a note with a tip about how to prevent the next problem. Sometimes it was simply taking an extra 20 minutes to explain things to a homeowner in a way that made them feel less helpless in their own house. He never talked about it. He kept no record of it. He expected nothing from it. At his retirement party, his supervisor said something that stopped the room. He said, "In 40 years, I have never once received a complaint about Henry. Not one. But I have received hundreds of letters about him, from people who wanted us to know that he was kind, that he took his time, that he treated their home like it mattered and treated them like they mattered, that he left them feeling better than he found them." Henry sat in his chair at the front of the room and wept. Not from surprise, he knew who he was, but from the rare and overwhelming experience of having your invisible contributions made suddenly visible, of discovering that the small, consistent, unremarked upon offerings of a lifetime had been received, had mattered, had changed something in people he had long since forgotten. He said afterward, "I never did any of it to be recognized. I did it because a long time ago I decided that every house I walked into was an opportunity to leave something better than I found it. Not just the pipes, the people. That is contribution. That is legacy. That is secret number 12. Lived fully, quietly, and without expectation. And that, in the end, is what enough looks like when it overflows." Here are 3 ways to begin sharing your enough with the world starting today. The first is to identify your contribution signature. Every person has a natural way of giving, a mode of contribution that feels most aligned with who they are and how they move through the world. Some people contribute through presence, their ability to make others feel genuinely seen and heard. Some through skill, the practical offering of expertise, time, or effort. Some through story, the willingness to share their experience honestly in ways that illuminate the path for others. Some through resources, the deliberate, joyful redistribution of what they have been given. Know yours, not because other modes of giving are lesser, but because contribution that flows from your natural strength is contribution that sustains itself. It does not deplete you, it replenishes you. The second is to adopt one person, one cause, or one community as the ongoing recipient of your deliberate contribution, not a passive one, not a subscription donation that you set up and forget, an active, engaged, personal one, something that requires your actual presence, your actual attention, your actual showing up. Because contribution that costs you something real, time, comfort, convenience, is the contribution that produces the deepest and most lasting sense of meaning and gratitude. Proximity to the impact of your giving changes everything about how it feels to give. And the third is to share your story, not for applause, not for followers, but because somewhere, in your city, in your family, in your industry, in the quiet corners of the internet, where people search at 2 a.m. for someone who has been where they are, there is a person who needs to know that what they are going through is survivable, that the chapter they are in is not the last one, that someone walked through something similar and came out the other side with their gratitude intact and their spirit unbroken. Your story is not just yours. It never was. Share it. Offer it. Trust that it will find the person who needs it most, in exactly the right moment, in exactly the right way, because that is what stories do. That is what human beings do for each other when they are at their best. They say, "I was here, it was hard, and it was also beautiful, and you are not alone." Before we arrive at the closing of this book, I want to sit with you here for a moment. In this chapter, in this quiet space between the last secret and the last word, you have traveled a long way through these pages, through 12 secrets that asked you to look honestly at yourself and your life and the gap between the two, through stories of people who found gratitude not in spite of their imperfect, complicated, beautifully ordinary lives, but inside them, through science that confirmed what the wisest human beings have always known, through challenges that asked more of you than most books will ever dare to. And I want to acknowledge something. The fact that you are still here, that you listened through to this final chapter, tells me something important about you. It tells me that you are a person who genuinely wants more from this life than what the surface offers, who believes, or wants to believe, that a deeper, more grateful, more fully inhabited version of living is possible, who is willing to do the real work of becoming someone whose life is not just successful by external measures, but genuinely, profoundly, sustainably enough. That willingness is not small. In a world that profits enormously from your sense of lack, from your belief that you are not enough, do not have enough, are not far enough along, the decision to pursue genuine sufficiency is a radical act, a quiet revolution, a choice that the most important people in your life will feel even if they never fully see it. Share your enough with the world. That is secret number 12. And it is, I believe with everything in me, the reason all the other secrets exist. We began this book with a paradox, the paradox of people who have so much and feel so little, of lives that look full from the outside and feel empty from the inside, of a world that has never been more abundant and human beings who have never been more starved for the feeling that any of it is enough. And we end it with a truth that I hope you will carry not just from this listening, but into every ordinary, extraordinary morning that is still coming for you. Enough is not a number, it is not a destination, it is not the other side of one more achievement, or one more acquisition, or one more version of yourself that finally meets the standard. Enough is a practice, a daily, imperfect, deeply human practice of turning toward what is already here and saying, yes, this ordinary, complicated, unfinished, deeply alive life, this is the one, this is mine, and it has always been more than enough. You have 12 secrets now, 12 keys to a life that is not waiting for circumstances to improve or wounds to heal or the future to arrive with better conditions. A life that is available right now in the middle of everything, in the presence of all of it. Use them, not perfectly, consistently, not all at once, one at a time, beginning with the one that called to you most loudly, beginning with the chapter that felt most personally written, beginning with the smallest possible step in the direction of a life you are genuinely, deeply, daily grateful to be living. Because that life, the one you are already living, seen clearly and inhabited fully, is extraordinary. It always was. You just needed to learn how to see it. Thank you for listening to Enough and Then Some. 12 secrets to feeling deeply grateful and fully alive. If this book moved something in you, share it. Not because it needs an audience, but because somewhere in your life there is a person who is quietly carrying the same weight you came into this book carrying. And they deserve to know that a different way of seeing is possible. Your enough is not diminished by sharing it. It grows. That, in the end, is the whole point. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and remember, the life you have been looking for has been looking for you too. It was here all along.